It's sort of like we all like to win, and there's certain athletes who hate losing. So there's a big difference between I like winning and I hate losing.
I want my locker room filled with those guys, the ones who hate to lose, allergic to losing versus guys that enjoy winning.
Right. So that's competition, right?
Sure.
We put bets on.
Yeah.
But relationships are not supposed to be competition. That's how the scoreboard gets.
But oftentimes they are. And that scoreboard we talked about last time, boom.
So once you're driven by your need to be competitive, and competitive in relationships, it could be a business relationship, it could be an athletic relationship, but if it's in an emotional relationship and you make the choice to be competitive and you have to be right, what happens to the other person?
Yeah, at the big dog. Hello again, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Divorce and Conquer. I'm your host, Joe Stasiak, and of course, joining us once again, well-known local therapist, Bob Anderson, also my former hockey coach. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm happy to be here.
You are, and very, very humble. He always brings his humility with him, which is something that a lot of folks lack. I want to talk a little bit about ego today because I think it gets us into trouble. You call it the wheel is. Explain when I talk about ego. What do you say the wheel is driving it?
Well, I was referring before we started recording to a poet named Delmore Schwartz, who was actually an influential teacher for Lou Reed. Brief period of time, Lou was in college in New York, and he wrote a book of poetry called "The Ego Is Always at the Wheel," meaning it's driving things.
Is it driving things into the walls?
Well, if it's driving things, then it's supposed to steer things and negotiate things and navigate things. And the ego is very straight ahead, as opposed to self-esteem. So I define ego as what I can do, and self-esteem is more of who I am. Now, there are some people that what they do is who they are, and that's probably the best balance you can have in your life. But there's plenty of people where you see giant ego and very little self-esteem. So the ego gets bigger and bigger and bigger, more dominant. They have to be doing something. And oftentimes they have to be doing something to people. And they cannot be, the self-esteem for them would be conscience, which gets in the way of the kind of successes that could be achieved by being ego-driven.
Tell me, let's go back to the conscience. Conscience, lacking conscience in terms of self-esteem, or conscience to me is kind of a moral compass.
There's this term unbridled ego. The unbridled ego just does what it wants to do. If it's at somebody else's expense, too bad. And the excuse is usually, well, if they could do it, they would. Or they'll do it to you, you should do it to them. Some sort of rationalization that says, that the ego is the most important thing. If you're ego-driven, you also have your guard up. And you're usually, going right down the center lane. And there's consequences for it. Why it can be very successful, but there's going to be consequences for that type of commitment to, an unbroken series of successful endeavors.
How much of a problem does it cause in terms of relationships? If there's definitely anything with being right, being respected, not being respected.
Right. So go back to what we were talking about before. Occasionally I'll use this questionnaire, which is presented to somebody for them to judge their own set of needs as opposed to their partners or their children or their parents, whoever they want to compare it to. And the first three on that list is the need to be right, the need not to be wrong, and the need to be respected. Again, if your listeners could go, well, let me see, if I have to live with somebody who has to be right and can't be wrong and must be respected, I can't live with them.
That's a problem.
Well, it's a problem because they have trouble living with themselves. Unless their need to be respected is so huge that it is driven by, I'm always right and never wrong. And that's why you have to respect me. That's not really respect.
And that's not really plausible, being right all the time and not being wrong. So where does that come from? Where does a person like that just always either has to be right or always thinks that they're right or can rarely to never admit that they're wrong? That's a problem.
It's probably tied to shame, because some people, if they're told that if they're not right, they're wrong. This is part of how they've grown up.
Why is it not okay to be wrong? It's okay to be wrong. We all make mistakes.
Some people are raised that that's weakness. That you can never admit being wrong, because that would be admitting weakness. And so, we all like to be right.
Of course.
It's sort of like we all like to win, and there's certain athletes who hate losing. So there's a big difference between I like winning and I hate losing.
I want my locker room filled with those guys, the ones who hate to lose, allergic to losing, versus guys that enjoy winning.
Right. So that's competition, right?
Sure.
To put bets on.
Yeah.
But relationships are not supposed to be competition. That's how the scoreboard gets.
But oftentimes they are. And that scoreboard we talked about last time, boom.
So once you're driven by your need to be competitive, and competitive relationships, that could be a business relationship, it could be an athletic relationship, but if it's in an emotional relationship and you make the choice to be competitive and you have to be right, what happens to the other person? You got to beat them down.
They're diminished.
That's a much better way to put it. Your need to be right diminishes them as a person who could have an opinion or a perspective or see something a different way. And if you can't be wrong, then you're going to. And then what often happens is, you're berating somebody until they give up. You're not right, but you weren't wrong. Therefore, your self-respect, which is based on being right and winning the competition, is all that needs to prevail. But it excludes somebody else. And, when you hear about pro athletes getting involved in violence towards women, especially children, less so, but towards women, you think that didn't start as an argument? They needed to prevail.
Of course.
They needed to be right. Sure. And when it came down to it, is I can't be right any other way except throw you on the ground. Well, and then now or raising my hand and then you stop talking.
Great. Play the tape to the end, and what are you left with? Okay, so I'm right because I'm standing over you like a heavyweight fighter. Like, what does that do? You go away, you get a trophy.
It feeds that person's ego. It feeds the person.
That person's going to feel good about that.
Yeah, because they're getting, we get the other person to shut up, back down, or didn't get back up.
Why does it bother us so much? Because I said this on a previous, and I'm guilty of not the physical part, but the wanting to win the argument. But is there a scoreboard that has a clock that reads 0 at the end of it? Because if the person still isn't backing down and I'm still trying to prove my point, knowing that I'm right, because I did say this, I usually don't argue if I think I'm wrong. I don't try to create an argument and try to angle it towards, I don't do that. So and again, I made this mistake, made it often. I don't do it anymore, but I gain nothing by it.
Well, let's say that, let's say the question is
That's a little for validation.
Well, there's that's a truly human thing. And you might wonder, why am I looking for validation? If we look out the window and I see a tree out there, I would ask you, perhaps your Christmas tree over there, do I have to say, does that tree have to validate itself? No, it's standing there.
Mm-hmm.
It's a valid physical entity.
Right.
It doesn't have to do that. But human beings don't seem to have the validity of even themselves in person. And they're trying to prove that I'm valid because I have value. Not just because I'm a human being on planet Earth equal to everybody else, but I have to have value. And then I have to have a lot of value. And the more valid I become, the more my ego is fed, or the more my self-esteem grows. Because there's people looking for validity probably don't have a lot of self-awareness. They just kind of know who they're not, what they can't do, but they don't really know who they are, so they feel invalid. Now they're looking for somebody outside of them to validate themselves, like you're validating somebody's parking ticket, a parking pass.
Right, sure.
So, but the validity has to come from within. And if parents are not raising people to be human beings, in other words, I think I said before that success in the animal world is survival, but in the civilized world, survival is about success.
Sure.
So if you're not a success judged by your culture, then you're not only a failure, but you're invalid. So, I mean, I think some of these spree killers that we have now are showing their validity. You didn't see me, you didn't hear me, you don't listen to me, well, know me now. So I just cut you down. And then probably kill myself because, I made my statement and that's it. I wasn't invalid.
What's wrong with someone like that? Are they not wired correctly from birth? I mean, because that's not what we know. A lot of them are not wired
correctly from birth. And so I'm not sure. I can't tell you exactly what the reason is, but the means always seem to be the same. Whether it's picking up a club in a cave and hitting somebody over the head, or my brother once said to me that the real technical revolution of the 20th century was that Aborigines had automatic weapons. I mean, he didn't mean anything racist by it. He was just making the point of you have undeveloped civilizations, and yet they had means of mass destruction.
Mm-hmm.
Once you have means and opportunity, then it's not your self-esteem telling you to do something like that. It's your ego telling you, yeah, well, it's time for all these people to move over and let the big dog eat.
That sounds familiar, that big dog thing.
Well, I mean, I don't mean it that way, but I mean to just say that, for that moment, they had the power of life and death over other people who didn't take them seriously.
Right. Okay. I know we're in the middle of a podcast. Someone is, hey, Mayor, I'm in the middle of a podcast. I can't talk right now. Okay, tell her to come in the garage. Thanks. Bye-bye. See, live TV almost.
There you go.
It's fine. We can actually edit that out.
The cleaner. So,
you give me a lot of trouble with that, but that's all right. I can edit that out.
You can just.
I'm kidding.
So, your question really is about how much does ego drive us, and how much problem does it cause? Would you say, because you do this work, you meet people with what you would say that is a very strong ego? I'm not talking about an egomaniac, but somebody has a very strong ego. Are they content?
When you say strong ego in terms of what's the
I know what I can do. I'm the best at what I do. I strive to be the best that I can do. I'm in a measurable way. People know me by what I do or produce or take care of. Could be even stand for. But the ego is about projecting self. The self-esteem is really, you can have a high self-esteem and a high ego. Those are pretty highly developed, people. They're the empathic, caring, thoughtful, kind type A's. And they do exist. Not very often.
Is there a self-esteem problem in our society? Who has self-esteem?
Well, the question would be this. How sexy is self-esteem?
Pretty sexy.
I just met this person. He has really good self-awareness and self-esteem.
Sure.
And I'm very attracted to him.
That's attractive.
That could happen.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But I met this guy, and he has his own business. He actually has kind of an empire. He has 4 houses. He has these cars. That's very attractive, right? That's much more attractive. So, if you are driven by self-esteem, that's going to affect your ego in the sense of going, I know what I stand for. I need to find ways to promote it. Like in coaching, we certainly Costa with coaches, we always talk about not just teaching the activity, but teaching through the activity. But it's very important to us. I mean, you know, a lot of guys that have played for the hockey club, and most of them turn out to be really good dads or really good husbands, and some of them are both, and they're honest businessmen and people you can trust and people you would leave your kids with. They're good people.
Sure.
So we're trying to teach them this is an activity where you can learn life lessons run by people that are interested in teaching you those things. And we conduct ourselves so everybody has the same opportunity to learn the same lessons. Not we're rewarding the star player. The star player has to have the same accountability as everybody else. Even though maybe he could do more on the ice, one guy doing it by himself is seldom going to get it done. They have to do it together.
And that creates a problem too. Let's bring it into the sports arena. Russell Wilson, apparently a lot of talk about him and his time in Seattle, his time in Denver. Now he had a horrible year. Kind of needing his own office, having his own doctor, having his own chiropractor, kind of separates himself from the team concept, and I think that has caused resentment. Would you agree but do star players, should they get star treatment?
Well, if you're talking about professional quarterbacks, this is a tiny percentage of human beings in the country or on the planet. And I'd say that their success, their individual success, because those teams start and end with quarterbacks. Usually the
Yes, they do.
Super Bowl is won by the best quarterback or the best quarterback of the day. Extremely complicated job. So very complicated. So when those people are successful and they say, I need this and I need this to continue to be successful, those things are given to them as long as they can remain. If that's what they need, that's what they need. Brady has his own chiropractor too. If your body needs to be realigned and put together and soft tissue needs to get rid of knots so you can perform at the peak of your ability, then that's what you get. Now, every player is not going to get their own masseuse, although like the Eagles have dietitians where every single player has their food and their shakes and everything else is tailored to them, given to them all on these same tables. They come in after practice and pick them up. Those are all individual things. Their individual weight programs are supervised, and they have financial advisors for them, things like that. But the quarterbacks who are clearly ego-driven have to continue to have every need being served, because I think they kind of feel like if one thing's off, then what? And I don't get back to this stage. I don't get the Wheaties box. There are some of those, but I think I don't get back to this stage because I'm here to win. At the end of the road is the Super Bowl, and I want to win one. If I win one, I want to win 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, because then I'm moving toward the greatest of all time, which that's an
ego thing. Sure.
Yeah.
That's an ego thing.
And then you want that quarterback. You want that guy hates losing.
Right.
He hates losing on a very...
That's okay. I know what you're going to say. That's okay. If he hates losing and it helps the team win, does the team care? Not really.
They all benefit from those rings. They all played on the Super Bowl team. It enhances everybody else's. If somebody's an 8-time Pro Bowler and the defensive captain on a Super Bowl winning team, they're probably going to the Hall of Fame.
Mm-hmm.
And then that is connected to who was their quarterback. So yes, that's very important. But I don't know how to judge the relationships that quarterbacks have with their families. The one guy I do know that I met was Roger Staubach. If you start any kind of competition, he has an ego the size of the Grand Canyon.
I'm sure.
But he is a person of tremendous goodwill, generosity, thoughtfulness. He doesn't have a question of self-esteem. He really, really is most alive when he's competing.
Mm-hmm.
But I think closely behind that, when he's doing something for someone else or with someone else, it's real close. So his retirement has been as successful or more so than his playing career.
So sounds like it's beneficial to have a really strong ego in maybe the sports arena, maybe the business arena, but you kind of have to leave that behind when you get back to family life, because I think it kind of goes off course there.
I mean, you can see that someone like Pete Rose has tremendous,
A little bit,
tremendous ego,
a little bit.
and it's almost never not there.
And does he not have any advisors to tell him, like, just, Pete, don't go in that direction. Don't bite on that question.
The question would be, how easy is it to get through somebody and say, you need to ramp that ego down? But that's how I succeed. That's how I get done when I get done. That's how I do me. You're telling me to back off on that, then I don't know who I am.
That's how you did you when you were your 4,000 hits. Not now, because you're trying to get in the Hall of Fame, Pete. How do people like that did not understand? That, to me, that's not self-aware.
He needs to compete. I mean, he needs...
With the reporter who asked him about an inappropriate relationship 50 years ago. How do you bite on that? How do you bite on that?
You're right, because he can't be wrong.
That's exactly right.
And he must be respected, and he's always right.
But doesn't he...
That whole girl was delusion.
And it was 50 years ago.
Right, so there's the kind of logic that there's probably women out there, if they're listening to this, going, I know guys like that.
Yeah. And with the other, I think answer is, it was before the reporter was even born, so why are you even bringing it? It's like we can't talk about things that happened before. It was, yeah.
You know, because in our culture these days, there's no statute of limitations on anything anybody can find,
Right,
in order to use their ego to tear you down.
right. That's exactly.
Let me go after this guy and show that he's wrong, and then he'll catch a lot of disrespect, and I exposed him, so I'm right, and now I get respect.
That is correct. Well, let me ask you this before we wrap, because I think that my ego, and I'm not even that ego, like the super ego, the id, and my former partner, I think it was a problem with us, because need to be right, need to be respected. I think that was a real underlying issue. I'm now trying to keep emotions in check and be unoffendable, which is work. It's disciplining your thoughts and whatnot. I find it very peaceful, to be honest with you.
Well,
I think that's a way to go. I did that in my last podcast.
Well, let's say your goal was to try to learn from people, learn something, even if you don't like them, or agree with them. Sometimes if you've got a divorce situation, I might ask the question, what did you learn from your partner? You know, what was the benefit to you? How did anything you learned was then passed down to the children, or you learned about yourself to help you get to this point now where you're trying to be saying, I'm not going to make emotional decisions. I'm not going to make ego-driven emotional decisions. The decisions I'm going to make are going to be objective. Everyone's going to be equal. It's very, very hard to make all ecumenical decisions without anything being involved, because who doesn't want emotional satisfaction?
Right.
You know, because that's immediate satisfaction. Winning an argument, somebody down, those are immediate satisfactions.
Yes.
So, but in human relationships, that satisfaction is oftentimes, the one we respect is when we see these couples that have been married for 65 years, and, you know, they're sitting there on a park bench holding hands,
right,
both in their 90s. Everybody goes, oh, that's amazing. And I wish they had that. And maybe that happened by magic, but most likely it happened because there wasn't a dominant ego in that relationship. They needed to be together. Nobody needed to be right at the expense of being together. They loved each other. Because the biggest enemy to love is going to be that. The biggest enemy to we is I. And I'm not getting my needs met. Well, your needs are more than anybody could meet. Well, yeah, that's what you say, and I'll prove you wrong with the next one. And, you know, then you can end up being married 6 or 7 times.
Team first.
As you're not. These are hard things to learn. Again, this is why we're trying to kind of teach them at the high school level to say, here's the lessons you can learn. A question used to ask players, what's the difference between doing the right thing and doing the popular thing? And in high school, they don't have an answer to that. But if you talk to them about it long enough, they realize they actually did have an answer to that. And they actually had that question banging around in their head. but there was nobody asking about it. Nobody that was saying, you can learn just from the exercise of saying, is there a difference? And it was because both of them had expenses. You can do the right thing and people can be hurt by that.
Mm-hmm.
But the greater good benefits. The popular thing is we're just doing what everybody else does and let the chips fall where they may and let God sort it out. We don't learn anything from doing that. So the difference is you're likely to learn something by doing the right thing, because even if there's a mistake made, you can evolve from that. That'll be a story that you'll always tell. You're not going to really tell many stories about everybody doing the same thing unless it's some zany thing at the fraternity or what happened in Vegas or something of that nature, which is, so you try, let's put it this way. Ego kind of wanders into the world of self-indulgence.
Mm-hmm.
That's where people get hurt. You know, somebody who cares about you, believes you, trusts you, and you're self-indulgent at their expense, then the trust is gone. There's nothing more.
Self-indulgent, what does that look like? Like an example of being self-indulgent that hurts the relationship.
Well, if you're indulging yourself, you're saying, look, this is what matters to me. What is in what hurts you may, and I, I'm not going to consider something else I put myself ahead of. This can happen where I don't like my wife's family. Well, my dad told me long before I got married, he just said, marry the girl, marry the family. And I never forgot that, right? So you have now made a commitment, though it's not in your vows, that you are married to that family.
Sure.
Part of that family.
Sure.
And their norms and expectations are going to be different. But that's now your family.
Mm-hmm.
That's a set of grandparents. It's a set of values that are different from the ones you were raised with, maybe. But they're people, and your partner loves them, and so therefore you've married that family. If you indulge yourself in, listen, that's your family, I don't have to do this, and I don't have to do that. Okay. I don't know what you think is going to come from that's going to be any good. Like, well, we're visiting my parents, but your dad is not coming. Why not? Because he doesn't want to,
right.
He doesn't have to. Then why do we have to go?
Right.
Now what?
Now
you have an unnecessary breakdown. Or people are in an argument and go, listen, I don't have to listen to this. I'm not going to talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm done talking about that. Well, if you're so done talking about it, you probably never really expressed what it was you wanted to, and you're mad at yourself. And that's a self-indulgence. Temper is a luxury. If you think you're in a relationship where you can lose your temper and it's okay, that's a great luxury. That's luxurious living. I can lose my temper and say whatever I want and pay no penalty.
You always have to pay the bill at some point.
Well, the truth is you do.
Yeah.
People think they don't. They just go,
that's a recipe for you crashing into the wall.
And they'll do the same thing again and again and again.
Mm-hmm.
But some people are raised to think that you have to go get what you want and need for yourself out there. And if you have to rip it out of somebody's hand, too bad, because they would do the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So the whole thing about people being equal means they're equally greedy or they're equally indulgent. So you behave that way. So you're the king of the pack.
Do it first before they do it to you.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. Very nice. Good stuff, my friend. Well, guys, you were going to say something.
What I wanted to say,
Just say you were going to say something.
but what I wanted to say was, I hope this doesn't come off as preaching because I have to practice what I preach. This is more the case of these are things that I've seen over and over again, and sort of what I know doesn't work and why it can't work. And, but I still have to relearn those things. I think life is a process of you learn, you unlearn, you relearn.
Repetition.
It's just, well, sometimes you have to unlearn. Like, that's not okay when you're married. That's not okay when you're a dad. That type of orientation to doing something is not going to work when somebody cares about you and has a certain set of expectations.
Mm-hmm.
So when we fail, we have to learn how to go, I need to unlearn that thing that was true for a generation of 40 years ago.
Right.
It's no longer true. Like my daughter telling me off and on about words I can't use anymore. And I would say, yeah, but we grew up with those words and it didn't really mean this or that. You know, it meant something else. Well, but now it means this. What she's really saying is, I live in this world and reflects badly on me if my father used
Right.
so out it goes. I know I could go, well, I'm using that word because that's what we grew up with and that's good enough for me. That's ego talking.
Yeah.
Where it should be, I don't want my kids reflecting badly on me, but I can have me, you know, reflecting
Yeah, on that. Sure.
So
Good stuff.
it's all about learning, not hoping, not preaching.
No, it's all right, man. Appreciate it, bud. Thanks, Coach. He's a well-known local therapist, Bob Anderson, also Conestoga's women's hockey coach for Bob Anderson, Tony Parisi, Jim McDonald, two other members of the production line. I'm Joe Stazek. Thanks for watching another episode of Divorce and Conquer. Remember to, if you can, tell everyone you know, share this podcast with them, give us a 5-star rating, and also feedback, what you like, what you might want more of next time. And you can check us out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and now on YouTube. Appreciate you watching, folks. Catch you next time.